Welcome to Life Stories, where we share heartwarming tales of love, resilience, and second chances. Today's story takes us to the serene hills of Napa Valley, where a lonely millionaire opens his heart and home to a homeless woman, unknowingly beginning a journey that would transform both of their lives forever. It's a story of healing, courage, and the unbreakable bond of family. Stay tuned to discover how one act of kindness can spark a chain of life-changing events. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's inspiring journey. Let's dive into the story. The golden light of a setting sun stretched across the lush, rolling hills of Napa Valley, casting long shadows over the pristine gardens of Charles Whitman's sprawling estate. From his second-floor balcony, Charles sipped a glass of red wine, his aged hands gripping the delicate stem. The rich aroma of oak and berries filled the air, but even the finest vintages failed to soothe the ache in his chest. At 75 years old, Charles had achieved every material success a man could dream of. Yet, his grand mansion, with its 20 bedrooms, opulent halls, and rare art pieces, echoed with a haunting emptiness. That evening, like so many before it, Charles found himself weary of the silence. Seeking solace, he decided to walk through the gardens. The cool evening air carried the faint scent of roses, their vibrant blooms carefully tended by an unseen gardener. The gravel crunched under his polished shoes as he strolled along the paths illuminated by soft garden lights. It was a ritual he had adopted in recent years, a brief escape from the cavernous loneliness of his home. As he turned a corner near the property gates, a figure on a stone bench caught his eye. At first, he thought it might be a gardener resting after a long day. But as he stepped closer, the truth became evident. A woman, wrapped in a tattered coat, sat hunched over with a small backpack by her feet. Her face was partially obscured, but the weariness etched into her posture was unmistakable. Charles called gently, not wanting to startle her. The woman stirred, her eyes fluttering open in confusion. For a moment, she looked disoriented, as though she had forgotten where she was. Then, realizing she was being watched, she scrambled to her feet, clutching her backpack. "I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice raspy and defensive. "I didn't mean to trespass. I'll leave right away." "Wait," Charles said, raising his hand. His voice, though firm, carried a note of kindness. "You look like you could use some help." The woman hesitated, her wary gaze fixed on his face. Her brown eyes, though shadowed with exhaustion, held a glimmer of intelligence and guarded hope. She appeared to be in her early 40s, though life's hardships had left their mark. I don't want to cause any trouble," she murmured, clutching her belongings tightly. "It's no trouble at all," Charles assured her. "My name is Charles Whitman. This is my property. Why don't you come inside for a hot cup of tea and a bit of rest?" Her lips trembled as she bit them, clearly conflicted. After a long pause, she finally nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. "My name is Lisa." Charles led Lisa toward the house, glancing back to see her taking in the grandeur of the estate with wide eyes. The mansion's towering columns and sprawling veranda seemed almost otherworldly in contrast to her worn appearance. Inside, they were met by Mrs. Cleo, Charles's longtime housekeeper, who had just finished tidying up the kitchen. The older woman's curious gaze lingered on Lisa but quickly softened as Charles made the introductions. "Mrs. Cleo, could you prepare some tea and a few sandwiches for our guest?" Charles asked. "Of course, Mr. Whitman," Mrs. Cleo replied, her tone professional but warm. As they waited, Charles invited Lisa to sit at the kitchen table. Under the bright lights, he noticed details that deepened his concern. Her hair was unkempt, her cheeks hollow, and her hands bore the roughness of someone who had endured years of struggle. "How long have you been without a place to stay?" he asked softly, careful not to sound intrusive. Lisa lowered her gaze to the table. "A few weeks," she admitted hesitantly. "I had to leave where I was living." There wasn't anywhere else to go. Charles nodded thoughtfully, his heart aching at the vulnerability in her voice. You can stay here tonight, he offered. We have plenty of guest rooms. Tomorrow, we'll talk about what we can do to get you back on your feet. Lisa's eyes filled with tears as she looked at him, her lips trembling. Why are you doing this for me? You don't even know me. Charles smiled faintly, the lines on his face softening. Let's just say I've been blessed with more than I need. It's the least I can do to help someone in need. Just then, Mrs. Cleo returned with a tray of steaming tea and sandwiches. Lisa ate slowly at first, then with growing hunger, as Charles watched in silence. Her gratitude was evident in every movement. And though she was guarded, there was a spark of dignity in the way she carried herself. After she finished, Charles led her upstairs to a guest room. The elegant space, decorated in calming tones of blue and cream, seemed to overwhelm her. I hope you'll be comfortable here, Charles said, gesturing to the room. There's an attached bathroom with anything you might need. Feel free to use anything. Lisa looked around, awestruck, before murmuring, This is very generous. I don't know how to thank you. There's no need. Charles replied with a kind smile. Rest well, Lisa. We'll talk more in the morning. As he closed the door behind him, Charles felt a strange mixture of emotions, concern for Lisa. Certainly. But also a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. For once, the silence in his mansion didn't feel so oppressive. That night, as he returned to his balcony to finish his wine, Charles gazed out at the stars with a quiet hope blooming in his chest. Perhaps, in helping Lisa, he might begin to fill the emptiness that had haunted him for so long. The next morning, the early sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the Whitman mansion, bathing the halls in a golden glow. Charles, dressed in his usual tailored slacks and a cardigan, descended the grand staircase. For the first time in years, he felt anticipation rather than dread at the thought of starting his day. He headed to the kitchen, where the scent of fresh coffee mingled with the faint hum of morning chatter. He found Lisa sitting at the kitchen table, a steaming mug of coffee cradled in her hands. She looked noticeably better, her hair clean and neatly combed, her tired face appearing softer and more rested. Beside her stood Mrs. Cleo, who was tidying up the counters but kept throwing warm glances Lisa's way. Good morning, Charles greeted, his voice carrying an ease he hadn't felt in a while. Lisa looked up and offered a shy smile. Good morning, Mr. Whitman. I hope it's all right that I'm here. Mrs. Cleo insisted I join her for coffee. Charles chuckled lightly and waved a hand. Of course. It's all right. Please. Call me Charles. He poured himself a cup of coffee and took a seat across from Lisa. I hope you slept well, he said. Better than I've slept in years, Lisa admitted, her voice tinged with both gratitude and a hint of sadness. But I can't stay. I've already imposed too much. Charles studied her carefully, his sharp, observant eyes catching the flicker of doubt in her expression. And where would you go? He asked gently. Lisa hesitated, her gaze dropping to the table. I'm not sure, she murmured. I've been moving from place to place, staying wherever I can. Well, Charles began, leaning back in his chair. If you're open to it, I have an idea. He paused, giving her a moment to meet his eyes. There's a guest house on the property. It hasn't been used in years, but it's comfortable. You could stay there for a while until you're back on your feet. Lisa's eyes widened, her surprise palpable. I don't know what to say, she stammered. That's too generous. It's not generosity, Lisa. Charles replied with a small smile. This house, this estate, none of it means much when it's empty. Truthfully, I'd enjoy the company. Besides, perhaps you could help me out with a few tasks around here. It would be nice to have someone to share meals with once in a while. Lisa blinked, clearly overwhelmed by the offer. After a long moment of hesitation, she finally nodded. Okay, she said softly, a small, hesitant smile breaking through. Thank you, Charles. I promise I won't let you down. Later that day, Charles accompanied Lisa to the guest house. It was a charming little building tucked behind the gardens, with ivy climbing its stone exterior and a small porch overlooking a grove of oak trees. Though dusty from disuse, it was still warm and inviting. With 2 bedrooms, a cozy living room, and a compact kitchen. You can make it your own, Charles said, watching as Lisa took in the space. Rearrange the furniture. Decorate however you like. Consider it your home for as long as you need. Lisa's hands rested on the back of a worn armchair as she turned to him, her expression a mix of gratitude and disbelief. No one has ever done anything like this for me, she said, her voice trembling. Well, Charles said with a wink, it's about time someone did. In the days that followed, Lisa began settling into the guest house. She cleaned, rearranged furniture, and slowly infused the space with her personality. Charles noticed her small, thoughtful touches, a vase of fresh wildflowers on the table, soft curtains framing the windows, and a painting of a serene landscape hung on the wall. Lisa proved to be a pleasant and capable companion. Over shared meals, they began to talk more openly. Charles was struck by her intelligence and dry sense of humor, qualities that emerged more as she grew comfortable. Still, there was a weight she carried, a guardedness that surfaced whenever the conversation turned too personal. She deflected questions about her past with practiced ease, offering vague answers that left Charles curious but unwilling to press. One afternoon, Charles found Lisa in the garden, her gaze fixed on a bed of vibrant roses. She seemed lost in thought, her brow furrowed. A penny for your thoughts, he asked, approaching gently. Lisa startled slightly before offering a small smile. Oh, it's nothing, she said, though her voice betrayed her. Lisa, Charles said softly, you don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to share. But I want you to know you're not alone anymore. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she looked at him. Thank you, Charles, she whispered. That means more than you know. As she turned back to the roses, Charles couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning. He had extended a hand to Lisa. But in doing so, he had found something he didn't know he was searching for, a renewed sense of purpose and the faint, flickering light of hope. The days turned into weeks, and Lisa's presence brought a new rhythm to Charles's life. He found himself looking forward to their shared meals and conversations, a reprieve from the solitude that had weighed on him for so many years. Yet, beneath Lisa's gentle smiles and easy laughter, Charles could sense the unspoken stories that lingered in her silences. One morning, as the sunlight streamed through the French windows of the dining room, Charles joined Lisa for breakfast. Mrs. Cleo, ever watchful but discreet, had just left them with freshly baked muffins and coffee. Lisa was flipping through an old gardening magazine Charles had left on the table. You seem lost in thought, Charles remarked, breaking the comfortable quiet. Lisa looked up, startled, and then smiled sheepishly. It's just your garden. It's so beautiful. It must take a lot of work to keep it this way. Charles chuckled. It's mostly the gardeners. I just wander through and take the credit. He leaned forward slightly, his tone softening. You know, I noticed you spend a lot of time out there. You have an eye for beauty, don't you? Lisa hesitated, her fingers tightening slightly around the magazine. I used to, she said quietly, a long time ago. Curiosity flickered in Charles's gaze, but he stayed silent, giving her the space to continue. After a long pause, Lisa sighed and placed the magazine down. I used to paint, she admitted, her voice tinged with a mix of nostalgia and regret. Landscapes, portraits, anything that inspired me. It was my whole world. Paint? Charles echoed, surprised. His interest was piqued. What happened? Why did you stop? Lisa's eyes dropped to her hands, and her voice lowered. Life happened, she murmured. Circumstances, they made it impossible to keep going. I lost everything. And it felt like a part of me died along with it. The weight of her words settled between them. But Charles wasn't deterred. Instead, an idea began to take shape in his mind. Come with me, he said suddenly, rising from his chair. Lisa blinked at him, confused. Where are we going? You'll see, Charles replied with a smile, motioning for her to follow. He led her up a narrow staircase to the third floor of the mansion. A part of the house Lisa hadn't explored yet. The hallway was lined with heavy oak doors, and Charles stopped in front of one, pushing it open to reveal a spacious room bathed in natural light. This, he said, stepping inside, was Eleanor's studio. Lisa followed hesitantly, her breath catching at the sight. The room was a painter's dream, large windows letting in the California sunlight, shelves lined with brushes and paints, and an easel standing proudly in the center. Despite its abandonment, the space felt alive, as if waiting for its purpose to return. Eleanor was my wife, Charles explained gently. She was an artist, too. This room hasn't been used since she passed. He turned to Lisa, his expression earnest. It's yours now, if you want it. Lisa's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes brimming with disbelief. Charles, I can't. This is too much. You can. Charles insisted. This room has been gathering dust for years. It would be an honor to see it come to life again. And I have a feeling you're the perfect person to make that happen. Tears spilled down Lisa's cheeks as she stepped into the room, her fingers brushing against the easel and paints with reverence. I don't even know if I remember how to paint anymore, she whispered. There's only one way to find out, Charles said with a soft smile. That evening, Charles noticed the light in the studio glowing long after dinner. Curious but unwilling to disturb her, he climbed the stairs and peeked through the slightly ajar door. Lisa was standing at the easel, completely absorbed in her work. Her hands moved with a grace and confidence that surprised even her. Paint smudged on her face and clothes. Charles watched quietly, marveling at the transformation. There was an intensity in Lisa's expression, a spark he hadn't seen before. It was as though each brushstroke was pulling her back to life, reigniting something that had been buried for far too long. The next morning, when Lisa joined him for breakfast, her eyes sparkled with a light Charles hadn't seen since the day they met. She looked younger, freer, as though a burden had been lifted. I stayed up all night, she confessed with a sheepish grin. I couldn't stop. Charles grinned back, his chest swelling with pride. And how did it feel? Lisa's smile widened, a mix of wonder and determination shining through. It felt like coming home, she said simply. From that day on, the studio became Lisa's sanctuary. Charles rarely interrupted her there, respecting the sacredness of her creative space. But every time she emerged, her steps were lighter, her demeanor more confident. Slowly but surely, the pieces of her broken spirit were being put back together, one brushstroke at a time. Charles, watching this transformation unfold, felt a quiet joy. For the first time in years, he saw the mansion not as a lonely relic of his success but as a place where new beginnings could thrive. Lisa's transformation in the weeks that followed was nothing short of remarkable. Charles saw it in the way her posture changed, her shoulders no longer hunched with weariness. He heard it in her laughter, a sound that had become a welcome melody in the previously silent mansion. And yet, there was still a shadow in her eyes, a heaviness that clung to the edges of her newfound happiness. Charles, ever patient, waited for the right moment to gently encourage her to open up. That moment came one crisp autumn afternoon as they sat together in the garden. The sun was warm on their faces, and the roses bloomed brilliantly in the golden light. Lisa had been unusually quiet, her gaze fixed on the distant hills. Lisa, Charles said softly, breaking the silence. You've come so far since the day we met. But I can see there's something still weighing on you. You don't have to tell me, But if you ever want to talk, I'm here. Lisa's hands tightened around the mug of tea she was holding, her knuckles whitening. For a long time, she didn't respond, and Charles thought she might deflect again. But then, with a deep, trembling breath, she began to speak. It's not easy to talk about, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But you've been so kind to me. You deserve to know the truth. Charles leaned forward slightly, his expression encouraging but calm. I was married once. Lisa began, her gaze fixed on the horizon as though looking into the past. His name was Daniel. He was charismatic, successful. At first, I thought I'd found the perfect partner. He encouraged my art, introduced me to people in the art world. I thought he believed in me. Her voice wavered, and Charles noticed her hands trembling slightly. But over time, things changed, she continued. He became controlling, possessive. It started with small things, criticizing my work, saying I'd be nothing without him. Then it got worse. He isolated me from my friends, even from my family. He made me believe I was worthless without him. Charles felt a pang of anger rise in his chest. But he kept his expression steady, knowing this moment wasn't about his feelings but about hers. One day, Lisa said, her voice breaking, I discovered that Daniel wasn't just controlling, he was dangerous. He was involved in illegal activities, art forgery, money laundering. When I confronted him, she trailed off, her lips trembling as tears filled her eyes. He hurt me, Charles. Physically. I knew I had to get away, or he would destroy me. Charles's hands clenched into fists at the thought of someone harming her. But he remained silent, letting her continue at her own pace. I left that night, Lisa said, wiping her tears. I took only what I could carry and ran. I left everything behind, my home, my career, my daughter. Charles's breath caught. Your daughter? Lisa nodded, her tears flowing freely now. Emily. She was only 3 at the time. I knew I couldn't protect her while I was on the run, so I left her with my best friend, Claire. It was the hardest decision I've ever made, but I thought it was the only way to keep her safe. She looked at Charles, her eyes filled with a mix of pain and hope. I haven't seen her in 12 years. Claire sends me updates sometimes, pictures, letters, but Emily doesn't know I'm her mother. She thinks Claire is her aunt, and that her parents died in an accident. Charles felt his heart ache for Lisa, for the unimaginable sacrifices she had made. He reached out and placed a comforting hand over hers. Lisa, he said gently, you did what you thought was best for your daughter. That takes incredible strength. Lisa let out a shaky breath, her tears slowing. But now that I'm rebuilding my life, I don't know if I have the right to go back to her. What if she hates me for abandoning her? Charles's voice was steady, filled with quiet conviction. Emily deserves to know the truth, Lisa. And you deserve the chance to be her mother again. It won't be easy, but I'll be here to support you every step of the way. Lisa looked at him, her eyes brimming with gratitude and fear. You really think I can do this? Charles smiled, his expression kind but firm. I think you've already proven how strong you are. You've come this far, Lisa. I believe in you. And I know Emily will, too. In that moment, something shifted in Lisa's gaze, a flicker of determination that had been buried beneath years of pain. She nodded slowly, wiping her tears. You're right, she said softly. It's time. Emily deserves to know the truth. As they sat together in the fading sunlight, Charles felt a deep sense of admiration for Lisa. Her journey had been filled with unimaginable hardships. Yet here she was, ready to face her fears and reclaim her life. It was a moment of courage, of hope, and of the kind of strength that came from the depths of the human spirit. The next few days were a whirlwind of quiet preparations. Charles and Lisa sat together in the library, poring over old photographs, letters, and emails that Claire had sent over the years. Each picture of Emily brought a bittersweet smile to Lisa's face, a mix of pride, longing, and regret. "She's so beautiful," Lisa whispered, tracing her finger over a photo of a young girl with dark, curly hair and a radiant smile. "She looks so happy. Claire has done a wonderful job raising her." Charles, seated beside her, nodded thoughtfully. "She may be happy, Lisa, but there's a part of her story that only you can complete. She deserves to know who her mother is. And you deserve to tell her." Lisa clutched the photo tightly, her knuckles white. "What if she doesn't want to see me? What if she's angry? I abandoned her. Charles. I left her to face the world without me." "You didn't abandon her," Charles said firmly. "You protected her. You made the hardest choice any mother could make because you loved her enough to put her safety above your own. That's not abandonment. That's courage." Lisa looked at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I'm terrified," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Being afraid is natural," Charles replied gently, "but you're not alone in this. I'll be there with you every step of the way." It was decided that they would meet Emily at a park near Claire's home, a neutral and familiar place where Lisa could ease into the difficult conversation. Claire, overjoyed to hear from Lisa, promised to prepare Emily gently by explaining that her biological mother was alive and eager to meet her. On the day of the meeting, the autumn air was crisp and filled with the scent of fallen leaves. Lisa and Charles arrived early, finding a quiet bench near a grove of trees. Lisa fidgeted nervously, twisting her hands together and glancing around as if expecting Emily to appear at any moment. "Breathe," Charles said softly, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You've got this." Lisa nodded, taking a deep breath and clasping her hands in her lap. A few minutes later, they saw Claire approaching, hand in hand with a tall, dark-haired teenager. Lisa's breath hitched as she caught her first glimpse of Emily in over a decade. Emily's bright eyes were full of curiosity, and there was a spark of recognition in her expression that made Lisa's heart ache. As they drew closer, Emily tilted her head, studying Lisa. "Hi," she said softly, her voice tentative. Lisa swallowed hard, tears welling up in her eyes. "Hi, Emily," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm your mom." Emily's eyes widened, and she took a step back, her gaze flicking between Lisa and Claire. "My mom," she repeated, her tone a mix of disbelief and confusion. Claire stepped in gently, her voice calm and reassuring. "Yes, sweetheart. Lisa is your biological mother. She's been waiting a long time to tell you her story." Emily turned back to Lisa, her expression guarded. "Why didn't you tell me before? Why did you leave?" Lisa's voice broke as she began to explain. She told Emily about her life with Daniel, about the danger and fear that had driven her away, and about the choice she had made to keep Emily safe. She spoke of the years she had spent missing her, of the letters and photos that had kept her connected in spirit even when she couldn't be there in person. By the time she finished, tears were streaming down Emily's cheeks. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "I feel angry, but also, I don't know." Lisa reached out tentatively, her voice trembling. "I understand if you're angry, Emily. I'll give you all the time and space you need. I just want you to know that I love you, and I've never stopped loving you." For a moment, there was silence. Then, to Lisa's surprise, Emily stepped forward and hugged her tightly. "I don't know if I forgive you yet," Emily murmured into her shoulder. "But I want to try." Lisa held her daughter close, her tears falling freely. "That's all I could ever hope for," she whispered. Charles, watching from a short distance, felt his chest swell with pride and relief. He caught Claire's eye, and she gave him a small nod, her own tears glistening in the sunlight. As they walked back to the car later that day, Lisa seemed lighter, her steps more assured. "Thank you," she said softly to Charles. "I couldn't have done this without you." Charles smiled, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. You did this. Lisa. All I did was remind you of the strength you've always had. Lisa nodded, a small but genuine smile spreading across her face. For the first time in years, she felt hope, fragile but real, and the promise of a new beginning with Emily. In the days that followed Lisa's reunion with Emily, the two began the delicate process of rebuilding their relationship. They started with small steps, text messages that turned into long phone calls, and weekend visits that filled the once silent guest house with laughter and conversation. Emily was cautious but curious, and Lisa was patient, letting her daughter set the pace. Charles watched from a respectful distance, his heart warmed by the transformation he saw in both Lisa and Emily. The house, once a symbol of solitude, had become a place of connection and renewal. But as they took these steps forward, a shadow loomed over their happiness, one that Lisa had hoped would never resurface. It happened on a quiet afternoon. Lisa was in her studio, painting with a newfound confidence that had become part of her daily routine. The strokes of her brush were bold, her canvas alive with vibrant colors. Charles was in the study, sorting through correspondence, when the doorbell rang. "I'll get it," Lisa called, setting down her brush. Moments later, Charles heard a sharp intake of breath from the front hall. Rising quickly, he made his way there, finding Lisa standing frozen, her face pale. Standing before her was a tall man in a tailored suit, his expression cold and calculating. "Hello, Lisa," the man said, his voice smooth but dripping with menace. "It's been a long time, Daniel," Lisa whispered, her voice barely audible. Charles stepped forward, his protective instincts kicking in. "Who are you? And what do you want?" he demanded, his voice firm. Daniel turned his gaze to Charles, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "Ah, you must be the Good Samaritan. I've heard about you." He turned back to Lisa, ignoring Charles's presence. "I've come to collect what's mine." Lisa's hands trembled at her sides. "You have no claim over me, Daniel." "Not anymore." "Oh, I'm not here for you," Daniel said, his tone turning sharp. "I'm here for the paintings. The ones you've been working on so diligently. I've seen the ads. Lisa, your work is making waves. And I want my cut. After all, none of it would have been possible without me." Charles stepped between them, his voice low and steady. "Get off my property. Now." Daniel's smirk faltered, but his eyes gleamed with malice. "You think you can protect her? You don't know who you're dealing with." Lisa, though shaken, found her voice. "I don't owe you anything, Daniel. Those paintings are mine, and you have no power over me anymore." Daniel leaned closer, his voice a venomous whisper. "You think you're safe? You're not. I'll get what I'm owed, one way or another." Before anyone could respond, a voice rang out from the driveway. "Step away from her, Daniel." They turned to see Mark, Lisa's old friend from art school, striding toward them, flanked by two police officers. "Daniel Caldwell," one officer said firmly, "you're under arrest for tax fraud and art forgery." Daniel's expression shifted from smug to enraged as the officers stepped forward, cuffing him. "This isn't over," he spat at Lisa as they led him away. Lisa stood motionless, her face pale and her breath shallow. Charles placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "It's over, Lisa. He can't hurt you anymore." Mark approached, his expression a mix of relief and determination. "I started looking into Daniel after we reconnected, Lisa," he explained. "I couldn't let him get away with what he's done. The evidence was overwhelming, and the police were more than willing to act." Lisa's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Mark and Charles. "I don't know how to thank you both." "You don't need to thank us," Mark said softly. "You've already been through enough. It's time you had some peace." That evening, after the adrenaline had worn off, Lisa sat with Charles on the veranda. The stars twinkled above them, and the cool night air carried a sense of quiet relief. Is it really over? Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Charles nodded, his gaze steady. Yes. Lisa. He's gone. You're free now. Lisa let out a long breath, as though releasing years of fear and tension. I never thought I'd feel this way again. Safe. Charles smiled, his hand resting gently on hers. You're more than safe. You're stronger than you know, Lisa. And you're surrounded by people who care about you. You're not alone anymore. As they sat together, the house behind them glowing warmly in the night, Lisa felt a profound sense of gratitude. Her journey had been long and fraught with pain, but for the first time, she believed in the possibility of a brighter future. With Emily by her side, and the unwavering support of people like Charles and Mark, she was ready to face whatever came next. As the sun set over the peaceful Napa Valley estate, Lisa, Emily, and Charles sat together on the veranda, their laughter mingling with the soft rustle of the evening breeze. The journey to this moment had been long and painful, but it was also a testament to resilience, love, and the power of second chances. Lisa had found not only her daughter but also a family she never expected in Charles, who himself had rediscovered purpose and joy through helping others. Their story was one of healing, courage, and new beginnings, proof that even in the darkest moments, hope can shine through. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales of love, redemption, and the strength of the human spirit. Don't forget to like and share to spread positivity. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.